The invitation arrived in an unassuming envelope, its cream-colored paper crackling with anticipation, as it promised an evening filled with decadent indulgence and forbidden fantasies. The author of this missive was none other than the enigmatic Madame X, a woman whose name alone could send shivers down the spine of even the most stoic of men. The invitation was extended to 3 couples, each with their own unique connection to one another and the allure of age-appropriate temptation. Among them were the fiery-tempered Mrs. Blackwell and her husband, a man who could never resist the challenge that came with taming her spirit. Then there was the ever-effervescent Ms. LaRouche and her companion, a man whose passion for life mirrored his fervor for exploring uncharted realms of desire. Finally, the 3rd couple consisted of the regal Mr. Beaumont and his wife, a woman who could captivate any man with just a single glance from beneath her long, dark lashes. These 3 couples would soon discover that their connection to one another was merely the tip of the iceberg when it came to the tantalizing world of age-appropriate temptation. As each couple arrived at Madame X's opulent mansion, they were greeted by a veritable army of seductive attendants, clad in scandalously sheer garments that left little to the imagination. These attendants led their reluctant hosts through a labyrinthine series of rooms and hallways that seemed to defy reason itself. In one room, the walls were adorned with mirrors that reflected an infinite number of images of the guests, each visage more alluring than the last. In another, the air was heavy with the scent of exotic flowers that seemed to muddle their senses, clouding their judgment and heightening their anticipation for what lay ahead. As they moved from one sensory onslaught to the next, it became clear that Madame X had spared no expense in crafting this experience, a masterclass in age-appropriate temptation that promised to be as unforgettable as it was illicit. Each couple could feel their inhibitions slipping away like so much sand through an hourglass, leaving them free to explore the dark recesses of their desires. The main event of this erotic smorgasbord was a sumptuous feast that would make Bacchus himself green with envy. Platters piled high with succulent fruit and honeyed ham, crisp lettuces bathed in a luscious dressing, and crusty loaves of bread were laid out before the participants, each dish more tantalizing than the last. As they dined on these culinary delights, it became apparent that there was an art to this hedonistic hedonism. The conversations flowed as easily as the wine that bathed their lips, each exchange punctuated by knowing glances and subtle touches that hinted at the pleasures to come. It was in this atmosphere of unbridled desire that the couples began to explore the age-appropriate temptations that lay before them. And though they may have come with specific fantasies in mind, it soon became clear that Madame X's carefully orchestrated environment had a life and a will of its own that would lead them down paths they could never have imagined. As the night wore on and the guests surrendered themselves to the siren call of their baser instincts, it was clear that this age-appropriate temptation had taken on a life of its own. Couples intertwined in passionate embraces, their moans mingling with the sounds of laughter and satisfied sighs. In one corner of the mansion, Mrs. Blackwell found herself entwined with a younger man who met her fire with a passion all his own, his hands roaming over her lithe form as if he knew every inch of her body by heart. Across the room, Mr. Beaumont watched as his wife was wooed by an older, wiser gentleman whose touch seemed to unlock secrets she had long forgotten. And through it all, Madame X stood at the center of this maelstrom of desire, a vision of dark-eyed seduction who seemed to know each man's greatest desire and bring it to fruition. It was as if she had crafted these individuals from the very stuff of their fantasies, and now that those fantasies were becoming reality, they could hardly bear the ecstasy. As the sun began to rise on the horizon, its golden rays casting a rosy glow over the room, it became clear that this age-appropriate temptation would linger in each couple's memory for years to come. It was an experience that defied explanation, one that could only be understood by those who had surrendered themselves to the will of the enchantress who had orchestrated this unforgettable night. And as Madame X herself slipped out into the first light of dawn, her dark eyes gleaming with a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation for what lay ahead. It was clear that she would continue to weave her web of seduction. For in a world where age-appropriate temptation is the name of the game, there will always be a place and a need for someone like her. The end.